Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Kristy Woodson Harvey.
And I'm Mary Kay Andrews.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, and librarians. On this episode, we are thrilled to welcome Craig Johnson to discuss his new novel, Tooth and Claw. The book was released on November 19th, and we are so excited to speak to Craig about it.
But first, we have just a quick reminder for you to check out all the fun things going on in our Friends and Fiction community at friendsandfiction.com.
There you'll find our show schedule, details on upcoming in-person events, and links to our bookshop.org page, to the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa, to our merch store and our newsletter sign-up. In other words, if you want to know more about anything Friends and Fiction offers, and we offer a lot, be sure to check out friendsandfiction.com.
And also check out our Friends and Fiction Endless Stories newsletter on Substack. You can read all our free weekly posts on the Substack website or app. And if you subscribe, each new post will land in your inbox so you never miss a thing. The basic newsletter is free, but for paid subscribers, we offer incredible extra content, including deeper dives with all of our weekly show guests, plus monthly roundtable discussions between the 4 of us and our author friends, like the one I just did with 5 thriller writer friends about why we like to be scared and why we like to scare other people. We also recently hosted a live Ask Me Anything session where paid subscribers hopped on with us before the show in a private Zoom. We will be announcing more of those VIP Zoom sessions soon, available only to paid Substack subscribers. The paid subscription costs just $5 a month. And as a reminder, if you enjoy tuning in for our weekly Friends and Fiction interviews, this is a good way you can support us for basically the cost of a cup of coffee. You can always start free and upgrade. Check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com.
Yeah, and we actually have a deal running right now through December 6th or 16th where you can subscribe for only $4 a month, 20% off. And also, I'm not sure if you've heard, but if you haven't, we have announced our 2025 Friends and Fiction subscription box, which is so exciting. It's going to be with Oxford Exchange. And so the way it works is you get a copy of Patti's brand new book in March, mine in May, and Kristin's in June. And you have the option to add on Mary Kay's paperback of Summers at the Saint. You get some free Friends and Fiction swag that you can't get anywhere else. And it's a really fun gift. If you order for the holidays for yourself or someone else, you get a little free ornament too, plus a little gift certificate that you can wrap up and put under your tree. So it's a really fun gift. And if you are a fan of ours, hopefully you are, and want to support the show, that'd be a great way to do it. Okay. So now we are on to the main event. Let's welcome our friend Craig Johnson.
Craig is a New York Times bestselling author of the Longmire series, the basis for the hit Netflix original series Longmire. He's a 2-time recipient of the Western Writers of America Spur Award for Fiction. And his novella, Spirit of Steamboat, was the first one-book Wyoming selection. He also received the Mountain and Plains Independent Bookseller Association's Reading the West Book Award for Fiction.
Craig lives in Ucross, Wyoming, population 26, which makes Beaufort, North Carolina look like a thriving metropolis. And his new book, Tooth and Claw, was just released on November 19th, and it is set in the Alaskan tundra where a young Walt Longmire and Henry Standing Bear face off with powerful enemies who will do anything to get what they want. Sean, can you bring Craig on, please?
Hello.
Hi, we're so happy to have you here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, welcome to Friends and Fiction.
Good to be here.
Craig, Tooth and Claw is a short novel in your Longmire series.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned this a little, but Walt and Henry, after returning from Vietnam, head to Alaska to look for work. They believe that the polar bear, who seems hell-bent on their destruction, is the most imminent threat until they learn that their coworkers are searching for a priceless treasure and will stop at nothing to get it. So that's a little about what this book is about. Can you tell us a little more? And can you tell us what it's really about?
It's interesting like that because, I mean, I started this book like about 5 years ago. Like it's the third novella, that I've written like that. And, you guys can back me up on this. I sometimes come to the conclusion that writers are something like horse gamblers at the track. And that, we look at stories the same way that they look at horses, and we think to ourselves, okay, yeah, it's a good idea, but I don't think it's a 300 or 400 idea. I don't think it's going to go the distance. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a bad idea. And so,
Right.
years and years ago, like that, I kind of came to the conclusion that just because it was a shorter story didn't necessarily mean it wasn't a good story. And so the first one that I wrote was Steamboat, like that, which was the first Wyoming state read, which I'm very proud of, like that. But it was kind of a hard sell with Viking Penguin. They weren't really sure that they wanted to do, a 150-page novella. They weren't, sure that would actually work. And then, it made it on the New York Times bestsellers, list. And that was before the television show ever came about. And so that was, quite a feather in my cap. And so it kind of opened the door a little bit like that for the possibility of doing some shorter pieces. And I did Highwayman, I think it was about maybe 5 years later, which was another novella like that took place, in the Wind River Canyon there in the central portion of Wyoming, about it being haunted, by a dead highway patrolman like that. And then this one came along like that. And like I said, I got started on it about 5 years ago. And it just wouldn't do what I wanted it to do like that. And I finally just, kind of set it aside and thought, at some point in time, I'll go back to this and I'll be able to work on this again. And fortunately, one of the things that I do is I tend to write the acknowledgments for each novel before I write the novel itself, which is kind of odd. Most people.
That is odd.
Yeah, until, they get the book done and then they'll go back like that and write the acknowledgments. But the reason I do that is that I generally want to know, why it was that I wanted to write this book. And so I went back, and wrestled through the pages and finally found the old acknowledgement that I had and discovered that, one of the reasons why that I had written this book is that, I'm a serial reader like everybody else. And when I was in my preteen years, like that, one of the writers that I remember reading, just everything that he wrote like that was Alistair MacLean. And, you talk about Alistair to an awful lot of people and they have no idea who you're talking about. But then you mentioned,
I loved Alistair MacLean.
You mentioned, Gut Force 10 from Navarone, Where Eagles Dare. You go through all those titles. If you made a grocery list, they made a movie out of it, for goodness sake. And so, I thought, that was what I was looking for because it's funny you were talking about thrillers there before because I've been criticized before because I've actually made the statement publicly that a lot of thrillers are kind of like mysteries with lobotomies is what they are like that because basically what they do, who did it in the first 2 chapters of the book. And then you've got 500 pages of chase and unfortunately there aren't that many writers that can sustain that kind of excitement and energy in a chase scene like that. And so I remembered like back in the old days like that when of course like Alistair MacLean was writing and he was really wonderful in the sense that he didn't overwrite the book so that they were like 500 or 600 pages long. But he also the number of twists, the number of, all of these plot quirks like that went on during the course of the book were absolutely amazing like that. And I defy anybody to read, Where Eagles Dare and get to that big scene at the end, where they're in the same room with the American and the German generals and know what's happening by the time you get to the end of the scene. I think, it's kind of fun to watch like that. But he was very, very good at what he did like that. And so I thought, okay, that was one of the main reasons. And then the other is it was kind of a bookend, to Walt's Vietnam experiences where Walt, he had been in Vietnam like that. He had been in Johnston Atoll, a rock, out there in the middle of, the Pacific Ocean, and what he wanted to do was kind of just cool off. And so he chose the North Slope of Alaska. And boy, did he get his money's worth. It's about 60 degrees below zero. And, and all these things started happening like that. And of course, what's happening at this point in time also is Walt is a different kind of Walt, than maybe we've noticed, in the books or in the television show on Netflix like that. This Walt is alcoholic. He's kind of world weary, mad at the world, but still got this really sarcastic kind of sense of humor. And so for the first time, Walt is one of the funniest guys in the book. Generally that's reserved for a lot of the support characters, the ensemble characters. But in this one, Walt's, really, really kind of funny, to be honest. And so it was a different kind of voice, since the books are all kind of written in first person. And I had a blast, writing this one, I have to admit, because it had the humor, but it also had that thriller aspect of Alistair MacLean, which is that international mystery of what's going on, with the Arctic refuge and, all these people that are trying to get their dibs in on this open land for drilling up there in Alaska. And then, of course, something happened, whenever I introduced, there's a polar bear in the books. And, and the reason I included that was I remember talking to a good Inuit friend of mine, and his son had just gotten a job as one of the spotters for one of the geologic teams. And I said, well, what exactly does that mean? Well, when they fly into certain areas to do ice core testing, or those type of things, they land the plane. And one of the first things that they do is they unload this shooter's tower, this aluminum shooter's tower, set it all up, and then a spotter goes up in the top of that tower. It's about 12 feet tall, and he gets up there in this swivel seat, with a gun rail and a 416 Rigby, and he basically, what he's doing is looking for polar bears to shoot at, so he can hit the ground in front of them to drive them off, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work like that, because this is an animal that really doesn't have a lot of interaction with human beings or firearms. And so it's not really particularly scared of human beings. And as a matter of fact, it's like one of the only carnivores that actively stalks and hunts and kills human beings on a regular basis. And so suddenly we had that element, involved in this, and so it was kind of a day at the races at that point in the time. And I had a grand time writing it, I have to admit.
Incredible.
Well, it's a fun read too. Now, tell us about the ghost ship Bechimo, because I love that element of the story.
That actually, I'm so glad you brought that up like that. But it actually exists. It's a true story. Like that. It's a ship that was built. SS stands for steamship, and it was a ship that was built in I think it was the late, it must have been after the. No, it was a steamship, so it must have been before World War II. And then it was built by the Swedes for the Germans, and the Germans had it. And then in reparations for World War I, it was taken from the Germans, and the British used it. And the British used it, for their company exercises, up in the Arctic, where a lot of fur trading went on. Like that. And so what they would do is they would dispatch these ships to go up there as long as they could before the ice, kind of closed in. And they were filled, with all of these incredible sables and furs and all of these things. And they would haul them all back out of there like that. But I guess in the I'm thinking it was in the 1920s, I believe, after the war, maybe the 30s, but it got trapped in the big ice. And they had to evacuate the crew. The crew jumped off ship and got rescued. And of course, the boat disappeared like that. And they thought, well, okay, well, it sank. And that's the end of that. Then about 10 years later, it showed up again. And these guys spotted it. They actually got on board and found it and everything. But it was already, moving out to sea, and so they had to jump off quick because they were in small boats and jumped off like that and disappeared again. But they actually had some items from the ship to show and photographs like that they had actually, been there. And it disappeared again. Another 10 years rolls by. It shows up again. And so the SS Bechimo has actually become one of the most legendary Arctic ghost ships in the history of that portion of the world. And the last time that it was spotted was in 1969, 1970, which is perfect for my timetable. And how I found out about it was there was a really great little article that was in World News Today. And it was a magazine that they produced in the 30s and 40s. And it was up in the attic of my parents' house. And my favorite quote, of course, about cleaning up attics is from Irma Bombeck, where she said, nobody who could ever read was ever successful in cleaning out an attic because you get up there and there are stacks of magazines and books and everything. And so you sit down and you start reading. And I remember reading that article and thinking, boy, this is incredible. This thing shows up every 10 years. It's kind of amazing. And so I thought, okay, well, if these guys are out there and they're doing these ice core testings, and things go wrong, which they always do in our line of work. And they're trapped out there without an airplane to get back. A thiocol only has limited, fuel supply and everything. If they're out on the big ice, against a polar bear, they're going to get killed. And so, I thought they need to have some place to go. And so once again, the SS Beishimo rears its head like that. And that's where they decide to go take refuge. Little do they know that the polar bear that they're up against, has been using this ship as almost a kind of like, a place, to be able to hide like that and be kind of like an ambush predator at that point in time. So at that point in time, all of my favorite characters basically become buffet is what they become at that point in time.
Yikes. Well, Craig, the Longmire series and your beloved character, Walt Longmire, the unflappable Wyoming sheriff grappling with the pain of losing his wife, has left an indelible impression on readers. So can you tell us how you originally got the idea for Longmire? What was that little initial spark of the story?
Oh, well, thank you. Those are very kind words, first off, like that. But I guess, you kind of, hit the nail on the head in many ways like that. I mean, one of the things I wanted to do, is that, I've described Walt many ways as being, if my truck slides off the road, in a blizzard in January and, on I-25, and I'm buried in the snow there, and I see a set of headlights coming up behind me. That's the guy I want in that truck. I want it to be Walt Longmire. Yeah. And he's kind of like bits and pieces. I kind of Frankensteined him, from a lot of different guys that I knew that work in law enforcement like that and kind of put him together, to make the perfect law enforcement entity. And then, of course, as a writer like that, we can't have perfect characters. So the first thing I thought of was, what's the thing I can do to him that will, destroy him? What's the one thing I can do that'll do damage to him? And I thought, the most important thing to me, of course, is my wife, Judy. And so I thought, okay, if I take Martha away from him, he's not going to be perfect. He's going to be damaged goods at that point in time. And one of my favorite proverbs is that we like people for their virtues, but we love them for their faults. And so many times, the two are connected. Someone's strengths, come from a weakness in their character, or their weaknesses in their character, come from a strength. And so it's always a question, as you guys know, to try and find that balance of what it is that'll, work for this character and make them, viable. And I don't know, after 20 novels, 3 novellas, 1 collection of short stories, another novella coming up here in the spring, and probably another collection of short stories coming up. I've yet to plumb the depths of the poor guy like that. So I feel pretty good about him, I have to admit.
I think it's working.
It appears to be the success is a nice byproduct to have like that. But then, as you guys know, also when you're writing a series, it's a little frightening like that, because you think to yourself, okay, well, yeah, I remember when I wrote The Cold Dish and I remember Catherine Court, the president of Penguin, setting me down and saying, we really like this book and we really love these characters. And I was like, well, I'm really glad to hear that, since you guys are going to be publishing the book. And she said, well, also, we just think that you've got the beginnings of a series here. We just think that with all there is, with the ensemble of characters and the world that you've created, we really think that this is an entire world that you can continue on with. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had a singular book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA and going, yeah, no, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's a good idea, but I got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And she said, well, why don't you go back to your ranch in Wyoming and think about this like that, because we think we're right. And so I did like that. And of course, the big question became, do these characters have more stories to tell? And the answer kind of came roaring back that, yeah, there were a lot of stories, that these characters could tell. The dirty little secret that I haven't mentioned is the first draft of The Cold Dish, the first Walt Longmire book, was over 650 pages long. And,
wow.
Yeah, and I think I did what a lot of beginning authors do, which I think is when you think you're only going to publish one book in your entire life. So you put everything in it because you figure, okay, this is my only chance. And so, at least I can, the grandkids will find this book someday and they'll know that I had something to say. But, I realized quickly in the rewriting process, that what you take out, makes a book as much as what it is that you put in. And a lot of times you think you know what a book is about, but you don't until you finish that journey of writing it. And then you get to go
Right.
back like that and take out the things that don't make, much of a difference like it. And then also even amplify like at, to the parts that you do.
Right. Now, you've got a background as a police officer, an educator, a cowboy, even a longshoreman. How, Craig, did those previous lives help you out in crafting this series?
Well, I think that, all the writers that I really enjoy, all the ones that I think are really good, they weren't just writers. They had life experience to draw from. And, it's always going to be what it is that you bring to the table. When you sit down, and start working like that. If you have a broader, I think, life experience to draw from, it makes, for a better writer, it seems to me. So I think a lot of it had to do with that. And then, my first book was written when I was 43 years old, which, I don't know if that's really all that. It was interesting because when the book came out, a lot of people said, wow, you're really young to start this. And I thought, boy, I think I'm really late, getting started to do this. But I think you've got to have something to bring to the table, I think, like that. And so certainly life experience is, an important aspect of that, I think.
Okay, and so we have to ask you about living in a town with a population of 26 residents. So how has that shaped your work and how has it shaped you as a writer?
Well, I built my own ranch there like that because there wasn't anybody to hire to do it like that. And I also, my father and my uncle had construction companies like that. And so we were slave labor, my brother and I like that, when we were younger. And so I learned how to do all that stuff like that. And so I built the whole ranch myself, which is another one of those life experiences that I think, probably was really good for me in the long run because it taught me something that young men need to learn, which is not everything gets done on a 3-day weekend. That some things are going to take a little bit longer, like that. You're going to have to work at it, for quite a while. And, you may not be very good at it at first, but, hopefully you'll get better. And, that, and then there's a focus, obviously, of being in that much of a rural area. Here I am in Boise like that, and there's so many things going on and it's so exciting. And, there's all kinds of theater and movies, and live music acts, and museums like that and all of this kind of stuff. And, I would find it very, very difficult to live in a place like this simply because there's just so much going on. Whereas, in Ucross, there isn't that much going on like that. And so, you can kind of like hunker down during the Wyoming winter. And I really use that as an excuse, because I do an awful lot of traveling. I think I've been on 3 tours already this year like that. There's been one for the book in the spring. And then there was a European tour like that where the books have been translated into about 27 languages like that. And then another tour like that with this novella like that. And so you get, it can be a habit where you end up looking like a Fuller Brush salesman like that. But then the other part of that is that, if you didn't write anything, then nobody wants to talk to you anyway, or hear you talk. So, you need to have that physical time of actually, focusing on the writing. And I think Ucross provides that in many ways.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much, Walt's best friend, Henry Standing Bear, is just such an indelible character. I was wondering what kind of research goes into getting the Native American aspects of your books accurate and just the right.
Well, it's kind of essential. They're my, right, where my ranch is, like immediately to the north, there's the Northern Cheyenne and the Crow Reservation. And so, those are, really big reservations with a lot of Native people in them. They're my neighbors, my friends, and some of them even family. And so it's kind of essential, to the whole process that they be a part of what it is that I have to say, just simply because if I'm going to give you an accurate representation, an honest, view of the world, in which these characters live, then they have to be a part of that. And, it's fortunate in that, I've been living there in that area, for over 30 years. And so I know all of them extraordinarily well, that they're very close. And so they trust me like that. And so, I mean, one of my favorite quotes on writing is the one from Wallace Stegner, where he says the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody on this book is based off anybody alive or dead. And what a crock that is. I mean, that's your job, is to find interesting people and put them in your books. Like that. And so that's one of the things that I do like that is, include those people in my books. And, it's hard enough when you come from a state that only has 500,000 people in it, but it's even worse up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, where there are only 3,000 or 4,000, enrolled members of the Northern Cheyenne tribe. And so whenever I put any of them in my books, they all know who I'm talking about, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
And that's okay by me, because I haven't vilified anybody like that. But I don't know. I mean, they're just such incredible people. It would just be disingenuous of me to not include them in the books. They have to be in there. And then, if I'm going to include them in the books, I have to make sure that I get it right. And there's some information that they give me that they prefer I didn't share. And then there's some information that they're more than happy, to share with the people of the world like that. And it makes, for another layering, I think, in the books, that makes them interesting, especially the spirituality and the mysticism that's in the book. Yeah. I think that, I knew there were a lot of different layers, that I wanted to have in the books. And that was an important layering to have in there also like that. And, I don't think I could write the books if they didn't have all those layers. I mean, you guys know what it's like. I mean, somebody picks up your book, they're going to have it for a couple of days, a week or whatever, but you're going to be working on that book for the better part of a year. And so it better hold your attention, as opposed to just reading the book. Right. So.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Well, so speaking of that was like you knew what I was going to ask you next, was a perfect segue. So your books are primarily Westerns and mysteries, but you have defied genre sometimes by adding action, adventure, political thrillers, sports, and even the supernatural.
Yep.
So why do you choose to experiment like this? And how do you decide where to take your stories each time you set out to write one?
You know what? I'm not a particular believer in genre. I have to be honest with you. I think genre is just a cooked up metaphor, for the publishers to try and pigeonhole your books so that they can sell them. It's a marketing ploy is what it is, to be honest. I don't think there are only two genres of books, good writing and bad writing. And so you should avoid the bad stuff and try and read the good stuff, it seems to me. And then, for me, my own personal traits are that I'm a little bit like a crow. I tend to fly around out there, in the literary world. And then whatever I think works, I just collect it up like a shiny object and bring it back and put it in the nest of that book and utilize it like that. I mean, I've been told that, there's a lot more humor, in my books, than an awful lot of mysteries and thrillers and all of that. But, to me, that's a classic element of humanity. If you don't have a sense of humor like that, then, I can always tell when someone's writing about police officers, it's never been around police officers before in their life because the characters are so serious. They're so serious about breaking the big case, and it's all about the big case, and all this, and then, there's no humor. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, you don't get through to the end of the day without having a sense of humor. And so that's a really important part of it like that. And then, I'm a firm believer that there's an awful lot out there going on than, what we might be aware of. And, whenever I'm standing around, with some of my friends up on the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow Reservation around a campfire or something, and they're telling me stories, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, okay, my kind of people have only been in that part of the world for a couple of 100 years. Their kind of people have been there for a couple of thousand. It's quite possible that they might know a little bit more about what's going on around us, say, than we do.
I love that.
Let's jump back to Tooth and Claw for a minute. The setting of
that
this,
one we're here. There's a book. That's right. I forgot. There it is. Right.
There's a book. Is there a book?
Yeah, it's such a different kind of a book. The relentless dark of the Arctic Circle as the winter solstice is coming invokes just such a sense of dread immediately. I'm a Florida girl. And when I read about ice flows and the wind and I'm like this. How did you decide on this setting? And You told us before everybody else came on, you told us a little bit about that. You like to go to Alaska fishing. What research did you do to bring this whole story to life? You didn't go to the Arctic Circle in the winter, did you now, Craig?
No, I didn't quite make it quite that far like that. But yeah, it's interesting like that because I mean, the environ, of a book, is such an important aspect. And I tend to refer to Alaska as Wyoming on steroids is what I tend to refer to it like that. And, it really, I mean, you talk about, vast oceans and large open areas like that of ice and snow and wildlife. That's pretty much about as wild as it gets. And, I just, I thought, okay, well, all the way since the cold dish, Walt had talked about doing security on an oil rig, up there in Alaska. And I thought to myself, there's got to be a story that goes along with that in some way. And, there's an old proverb about fighting bears like that. And the proverb goes that if it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, right. Because they are just so ferocious. And so then I started doing a little bit of research on the Inuit, beliefs, as far as the bears are concerned, and so there was this one particular bear god, the Nannerlook, that I thought, okay, that kind of fits in, with this instance, and is this creature a bear god or is it a regular bear or, what is it? And, and how is it as capable of picking off these individuals as much as it is like that? Because, the Alistair MacLean aspects of it are there but then again, there's also a little bit of Agatha Christie in there too, like that, because, we've got this limited number of individuals, that are stuck, on this ship. And this bear knows this ship extraordinarily well and has been using it, as bait, to lure, people on there like that. And then they don't get off like that. And so it seemed to me that this was something that really kind of laid itself out as a perfect kind of thriller mystery of extremes. And so it's got a little bit of that Michael Crichton, Peter Benchley Jaws, kind of aspect to it too. And once I got all of those elements, all kind of in place, and got the idea of the tone of the book that I wanted to write, then I thought, okay, yeah, this might work.
Yeah, I guess you could invoke, and then there were none. Speaking of Agatha,
oh, absolutely,
absolutely, or 10 little Indians.
Yeah, these poor guys. I can't get into too much detail. But these poor people that are trapped on this boat, because they can't go out anywhere because there isn't anywhere to go. And so they're trapped on this boat with something that's slowly but surely killing them off one by one. And so what are they going to do, and how are they going to fight this thing? Because Walt's gone up against some pretty severe characters before, but I've never put him up against a 14-foot polar bear. And so it makes for an interesting situation for him because guns don't seem to be enough and he comes up with some unique ideas as to how to combat this thing. I was kind of proud of him by the time it was all over with.
Yeah, I would not thrive in that situation, but Walt definitely does. So, Craig, we're talking about Longmire, so of course we have to ask you this. Having a book adapted for screen is often a big dream that we're always kind of chasing. So can you tell us about your road to the adaptation for Longmire?
It was interesting because I never really, it's not something I actually saw. It's something I actually, was trying to, chase after or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But then whenever the first book came out, it was interesting, because I got contacted by a number of directors and a number of actors who wanted to secure the rights, for the cold dish. And then, I kind of held back a little bit because I wanted to see what happened with the series of books. And it continued on. And then suddenly we had Warner Brothers came and knocked on the door And I remember talking to my literary agent, and there was one particular actor who I'm not going to name who, really wanted the cold dish, to make a feature film out of. And, she contacted me and said, well, hey, Warner Brothers with CAA has producers and directors and everybody, and they're wanting to do a television show. And I thought, well, I kind of like was thinking more of a feature film. And she said, well, why? Like, and I said, well, just, just for the, the kudos of like, having a feature film rather than a TV show. And she was like, no, things are changing, Craig. Like television is much more of a better option. And I said, well, why? Like that. And she said, well, because production values obviously are getting to be a lot more. The other thing is like if you have a movie made out of something that you have, it's all fine and well like that. She said, but if it's the same weekend as the next Star Wars movie or the next Avengers movie, then it ends up in the the slush pile in Walmart for $4.99 on a DVD. Like I don't know how much good that does you. And she said the great thing about television is that it comes up every week. And it runs for 12 weeks. So people that didn't see it the first week might pick up on it on week, 3, 7, 9, 12, whatever. And she was absolutely right. And this was even before, streaming services. And so they picked it up and I remember talking to Lee Child and Michael Connolly and these guys and saying, okay, well, what's this like? And boy, almost to a person, their statement was, they will slide you a check across the table and that is the last you'll hear from them. Like that, you won't maybe not even recognize, whatever it is, that whenever they have it made. And I thought that I'd gotten, away with that. I thought, okay, well, all right, like if that's the way it is. And then discovered that the producers that I was working with, they wanted to make me a creative consultant on the show as opposed to like an executive producer or something, because that way I would actually have say, in what they were doing and how they were doing it. And I think in some ways they were wanting to make sure that the television show followed the tone and the texture, of the books. But I think also it was as a money saving opportunity for them too, like that, because they could hire somebody who's an expert on sheriffing. They could hire somebody who's an expert on Wyoming. They could hire somebody who, is an expert on the Northern Cheyenne, the Crow Reservation, or they could just bring me in on a retainer and then I would have to answer all the questions that they had. And it actually made for a really remarkably, close relationship to the point where they actually even sent me the DVDs of the actors' auditions, that they were doing. Like it actually asked me for my opinions, and everybody that I voted for actually got the roles. Not that I had final say like that, but we were all kind of in accordance like that. And it's kind of a miracle when that kind of thing happens. And then we ran for I think it was 3 seasons on A&E. It was the Arts and Entertainment Channel, and we were the highest rated scripted drama in their broadcasting history. And then what happened was they tried to buy the show from Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers wouldn't sell it to them. And they said, well, then we're going to cancel it, and it seems kind of silly. And it was, and they did. But at that point in time, that's when all the streaming services were coming up, and Netflix grabbed it and did another 3 seasons. And that was, and then they, after 3 seasons, went to Warner Brothers and said, we want to buy the television show. We want to buy Longmire. And Warner said, well, we didn't sell it to A&E, and we're probably not going to sell it to you either. Like that. And so, Netflix said, okay, well, we're going to stop after season 3. We're not going to end it, but we're going to stop. And I think in the back of everybody's mind, certainly I think Netflix, they were thinking, you know what, we got this little Indian cowboy show. It does really well. But, once we stop producing, more episodes, it's going to stop, and then it'll just fade away. And then we'll just quietly cancel it. That'll be the end of it. Well, that was 8 years ago. And the show was still one of the top 10 to 20 shows every other week on Netflix.
That's amazing.
Evidently, it's doing okay. Even after all this time. So.
Has there been talk? Did I see somewhere that there's talk about a reboot, Craig?
There has been numerous talks about redoing it. Hold on, just a second. About revamping and regoing again like that, and all the actors are very clear about it that they would be happy to have that happen. The difficulty is that I don't think there's anything that corporations love better than making money by doing nothing. And so that's kind of what's going on right now between Warner Brothers and Netflix, that they're happy because the show is still doing really well, pulling in a demographic that they don't normally pull in, the above 30 crowd. And I hate to root for the show to start losing some of its panache like that, but that probably will be one of the reasons why it triggers a mechanism and gets them to drop it. But I think Netflix has a little bit, I think probably a sweetheart deal with Warner Brothers. So as long as they want to keep running it, they can keep running it. And But hey, there's that little 5-second blip that comes up at the beginning of every one of the episodes that says based on the novels by Craig Johnson.
Based on the novel.
And, boy, it does me a world of good. I'm not going to argue with it.
Can't argue with that.
Nope. All right, Craig. Well, if you'd stick around, we have more to talk to you about. But first, a couple quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
For all of you watching and listening, we encourage you to rush out and buy your copies of Tooth and Claw. The perfect place to do that is at the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You'll be getting at a discount and helping to fund our show, all while supporting our guests and our beloved independent booksellers nationwide.
We also want to remind you to follow along with us on Instagram and join our Facebook group if you haven't, which is more than 250,000 members strong. When you visit friendsandfiction.com, you can stay up to date on everything we have going on, and you can sign up for Friends and Fiction Endless Stories on Substack, which is chock full of bonus content.
Hey, Craig, where can people find you on tour and online?
We're pretty much everywhere like that, but probably the best would be probably at my website, which is CraigAllenJohnson.com, CraigAllenJohnson.com, like that. And we've got a tour of duty on there like that. We've got all kinds of different stuff like that. And they're more than welcome to jump on there and find me again.
Perfect.
Amazing. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being here today, for talking to us about Tooth and Claw and the Longmire series and your experience of living in a town of 26, which is pretty cool. It was such a pleasure speaking.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Now be sure to tune in next week when Kristin and Patti are going to welcome our friend Signe Pike to discuss her new novel, The Shadowed Land. That show will air on the Friends and Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, December 4th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And it'll be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, December 6th.
Thanks to all of you out there for being with us. We'll see you next time. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.